Hello, fellow weary travelers, and welcome once again to Catladonia. I am Catherine Cat, or any variation thereof, and today... What are we doing today? Oh yes, and I am back once again with part 2 of my Sewing a Medieval Bodice series, wherein I will begin tackling the actual sewing part of this sewing project. Will I succeed, or will my hopes be completely dashed? Keep watching to find out.
Welcome back to day 5 of the Eternal Bustier? Vest? Medieval adjacent top? Whatever. When I filmed this, I was running a fever and had almost no voice, but by golly, I was determined to get something done, so, well, you'll see. Today we finally get to actually get to the sewing part of this sewing project, and to that end, meet Merryweather. She's the first sewing machine I've ever purchased myself, and she's tough as nails. We've got a lot of sewing to do, and I'm hoping her contributions will help speed the process along. After removing the remaining vestiges of old projects gone by, changing her needle out with the help of a butter knife, since my actual needle key is somewhere in storage at the moment, and rethreading everything, I was finally ready to begin. After a somewhat hesitant start, I got into a nice pattern of muscle memory and completed the first panel. Only 4 more to go! Incidentally, if there's one piece of equipment I can recommend in addition to a sewing machine, it would be a magnetic pin dish. It not only gave me the luxury of just dropping the pin on the dish rather than having to be precise, but I also found myself running it over every flat surface around me at the end of every sewing day to look for stray pins and needles. And I did find a few, so a solid investment in my book. And we have completed assembly of all 5 pieces. Huzzah! Now we just have to do the part where we put them all together, add a lining, and find out if our pattern MacGyvering worked or not. But we are not one to be faint of heart, are we? Right? So let's get to it. Also, I was struck by the visual nightmare of picking up this many pins at once, so I figured I'd share it with all of you. Efficient, but oh so visually nerve-wracking. Anyway, with all 4 outer panels assembled, I clipped any loose ends before risking yet more pricking of my thumbs by pinning everything together. Assembly was going rather smoothly, all things considered, until I got to the shoulders. I kept running into this issue where the seam would look just perfect from the top, but then when I flipped it, the lines were most definitely not matching up. The mismatch was even more obvious when I flipped to the outside. To add insult to injury, my various seam rippers also appear to be in, you guessed it, storage. After a few moments spent staring into the void and wondering vaguely how to proceed, I decided to make do with embroidery scissors. Not nearly as efficient as a seam ripper, of course, but they did the job. Wanting to figure out where I went wrong, I tried again, this time being extra careful to check and make sure absolutely everything was lined up. I also noticed that the stitches seemed a touch loose, so I tightened up the tension and was just about to give it another go when a tragedy occurred.
Empty bobbin.
So with mounting blood pressure and a flood of Donald Duck swears being prevented solely by the pain in my throat, I resentfully filled and replaced the offending thread-wrapped hunk of plastic that is my bobbin. After taking a moment to collect myself, I started sewing again. For real this time. There was much anxiety, the utmost careful progress, and a plethora of goofy faces made. But alas, the problem returned. The seams were still a full 1/8 inch off. By this time I was beginning to lose my patience, so I ripped the seam again, filled it with more pins than a voodoo doll, and even let the tension down a bit before entrusting it once again to Merryweather. I sewed at a pace that could have been outrun by the laziest of glaciers. But it worked! It finally worked! I had a functional shoulder seam. However, as I breathed a sigh of relief, a sinister thought overcame me. I still had to do a second shoulder, plus all the other seams. And so I set to it. Fortunately, my fluffy brain had retained enough of the lessons learned from the first shoulder to get the second finished with minimal pain and anguish. But it had not learned enough to realize that the bust line might pose similar issues, which it did. At this point, I was getting too tired to try redoing the seams from scratch, so I tried something new. I only opened up the parts of the seams with discrepancies and then pinned to the extreme and hand-stitched those sections together to ensure a proper alignment. Much to my surprise and delight, this method worked quite well. I then marked the same section on the other bust line, hand-sewed, and finally went over both sections with the sewing machine to lock in the alignment. It worked so well it may be my go-to from now on when working with fitted tops. After that, I began the tedious but blissfully easy task of clipping edges and trimming excess bulk in the canvas stiffening layer to make finishing the seams easier before switching gears to assembling the lining. With fewer layers to meddle with and therefore fewer pins required, meaning less chance of accidental phalange stabbage, it seemed like a good way to begin winding down for the day. Hopefully. I still decided to use my trick of hand-stitching the bust seam before machine sewing, just to avoid any more wasting of time via seam ripping without a seam ripper. This resulted in there being zero seam ripping drama, and finding that only the pinning together of the layers before losing the light was keeping me from some much-needed rest time. Uh-oh. Remember when I said there was no seam ripping drama? Well, it was replaced with a brand new form of drama. Pinning drama! If you look at this clip carefully, you should be able to see that it seems I have pinned the pattern on, backwards? Inside out? I had somehow accidentally pinned the two layers together so that the bust linings were over the side pieces, and vice versa. Unfortunately, the two layers would have to be unpinned, flipped over, and repinned. After taking yet another moment, this time to allow my more childish side to contemplate the cost of jettisoning this entire project into space, my more mature side prevailed and decided to forge ahead. And finally, fingers stiff, brain fried, and back aching, I had repinned the back panels together. Still, for the sake of my health the following day, I decided to allow my back to claim sanctuary and leave the remaining pinning for another sewing day.
And we're back a few days later. I've made an important discovery. This shirt, which is a hand-me-down from my mother, does in fact bear a close resemblance to a medieval tunic. So that is making everything much better. So we've got that, we've got some peppermint tea, but we also have some slight unfortunate news on our work last time. As you may recall, last time I was working while having a fever and sore throat, so no voice recording at the time. And, you know, not only did I get these pieces backwards last time, which was its own hilarious little sidetrack. It appears that I have put the lining on inside out. Because if you'll notice, that right there is the, what do we call it? The canvas stiffening layer. That's not supposed to be showing. So first order of the day, detach this. And then one other thing we forgot last time is that we need to go in and on curved seams, we need to do the notching and clipping. And I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a slight discrepancy here between the seam line that I've got here on the lining piece, which was essentially my pattern, and this piece here. It's more of a straight line on this one. So what we're gonna do, I think, is attach it as a straight line first, and we'll do a fitting try on once we get everything all reassembled. And if it doesn't quite look right, if it's looking like it needs the curve, then we'll put the curve in instead and work from there. And fingers crossed, hopefully we come to some sort of proper fit so that we can get the edge binding on, get the grommets in, and actually try this thing on. Hopefully today or next filming day. But it'd be nice if it were today. Let's see.
The clipping and notching process, while a little nerve-wracking initially, was actually quite simple and didn't pose too much of a challenge. Then, after reviewing the instructions to stall for time, and taking 2 or 3 deep, cleansing breaths, I prepared to pin everything together. Only to remember I hadn't pressed my seams. After carefully considering that they would soon be well hidden within my increasingly monstrous creation, the thought did occur to me that in the unlikely event that the YouTube sewing royalty got a hold of this footage, they might throw the sewing heresy card into the ring. And so it was the return of the king, iron, brought order where there was chaos. Namely within the seams of this would-be vesty thing, peace where once hung the looming shadow of being cancelled in the comments, and the promise of a garment unfettered by unsightly lumps and bumps in the seams. And there was much rejoicing. Yay! It was only then, pins in hand, that I was able to forge ahead and finally do what a competent seamstress could have done within an hour. Pinning the outer and inner layers together. Finally, we would be able to move on to the all-important step of sewing.
So, we've hit another snag. How many does that make now? I don't know. If you've been keeping track, comment down below. Let me know how many I've done this time. But, so, as I was pinning these together, we have a slight little issue here where it's a little short in places. As you can see here, it is quite a bit short. So, while I was considering my options, first the idea came that I could just, give up entirely, go into the kitchen and eat the entirety of the leftover chocolate bread pudding sitting in the fridge in true 90s rom-com style. But I thought that might be a little extreme. So instead, what we're gonna do is, I think we're gonna cheat a little bit. I happen to have a bag of scrap here. Scrap white material. The same stuff, just the white cotton. And I think what we're gonna do is we're going to pull a bit of a sneaky trick of just taking some pieces of fabric and kind of extending these bits with some, as careful of stitching as we can. Just because at this point, I really just kind of want to see if that final pattern worked at all. And if it did, then I'm not going to really be too fussed if the lining looks kind of heinous. because then if I do future versions of this with other colors, other patterns, then I'll know for sure that the pattern works, and you know, we won't have to do this again because we'll cut out the right thing at the beginning. But for now, just for the sake of figuring out whether or not this pattern adjustment that I've done worked properly, and for the sake of this video ending some point in the near future, we're gonna see if we can make this work and, you know, get to the point where we can try it on and see how it fits. Wish me luck.
And so it was that, patience waning, I began the questionable process of Frankensteining the inner lining, aka the original fitted pieces, to fit the new pattern pieces. Nothing fancy, just very careful, I guess you could call it a ladder stitch? Just something meant to hold everything together without pulling too hard and puckering the fabric along the way. Not exactly exciting stuff, but a mercifully simple process that had a fun piratey, or had to let out their seams themselves for lack of tailoring funds, effect. The process was repeated along any edge I was nervous about. It was then that, with all the pinning in place, and all the unfortunate lining edges so cruelly altered, that I was finally able to bring back the sewing machine. And begin the long task of forcing all the layers to play nice and work together like a good team. Came the confusing part, attaching the sides to the front. The construction of this piece works a bit like a sort of harness wrapping down from the top of the shoulder to attach together under the arms, but with the added wizardry of attaching bias tape to not only the shoulder/armholes, but along the newly created underarm seam. Unfortunately, the bias tape I had was not quite the proper color, but I decided to forge ahead anyway, if only for the sake of finishing this already too long project. As you can see from the footage, bias tape is as strange and foreign to me as children are to Jim Carrey Stefano from the series of unfortunate events. And after weighing my options, and gauging how much filmable light I had left for the day, I decided that procrastination was, in this case at least, the better part of valor.
Oh, you're back. And so, with the most basic construction done, many questions of fit still waiting in the offing, and stopping just short of attempting such final details as edging tape and eyelets, we take our leave until next episode. But in the meantime, if you have enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit the like button, or maybe even share the link with someone you know who might also enjoy it. And if you'd like to see more content like this, or whatever mischief I happen to get up to on this channel, maybe hit that subscribe button. But until then, fellow weary travelers, good day, and God be with ye.